Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the GSMC Sex Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am one of your hosts, Becky, and today's episode is all about one-night stands. And I wanted to start today's episode by clarifying something that was brought up to me by a friend who listens. Hi, friend. And one of the things that they had mentioned to me was I was a little careless in my phrasing of a couple of my topics in my last episode, which was, if you haven't listened to it, about masturbation as well as porn and separating, fantasy from reality and all of those great things. But the one thing that they had pointed out to me was that when talking about human anatomy or genitalia, I kind of stuck to the binary system in terms that there are only two genders, and I wanted to apologize for that because I realized that we are living in a world where that is not the case, and I definitely wanted to make sure that I clarified that, I don't feel as though there are only two genders. I want everyone to be as free as possible, obviously. And rather than just saying, men or women, I probably should have been a little smarter in saying, those with penises or those with vaginas. Because I don't want, people in the binary, I don't want people in the trans community to think that I'm not also thinking of them. But like I say a lot on this podcast, we're all still learning and we're all still growing, myself included. I don't know all the answers and I don't know everything. So if you hear something on my podcast that, doesn't quite track with you, please let me know, because I am, like I said, I'm still learning and I'm still, figuring out how best to adjust my behavior so that everyone has a good time and everyone is respected. In addition to that, I had also said that everybody, wants to have sex, everybody wants to masturbate. And along the same lines, I had kind of forgotten that not everybody does. And in specifics, the asexual community or the ace community. So I apologize for that. It's been a long week. And I will, try to be more conscious of what I'm saying and how it can be perceived, to my audience. So sorry guys. And like I said, I'm still learning, but if you hear anything, in those regards, don't be afraid to reach out to us on our social medias and let me know. As for today's episode, I decided we need to talk about one-night stands. And this coming from someone who really has never had a one-night stand. The last one ended up being my current relationship, so I don't think that counts. But I have a few friends who have been in one-night stands, and I did a little bit of research with them on their experiences, so let's buckle up and talk about one-night stands. Now, the first thing I want to say is I don't think one-night stands are bad, but I do think we live in an age where because sex really isn't talked about, and the idea of teaching people how to be intimate with one another is so lacking. I think one night stands can be a little dangerous and also can be extremely sexy. So I am of the opinion that one night stands can be both good or bad depending on the two or more people involved. So let's just start there. But with talking with a couple of my friends, the one theme that seemed really essential in all of them was that communication was key. And this is definitely a recurring theme with me and my podcasts. Just talking with each other is so important in all aspects of relationships and sex. And especially if you are meeting this person for the first time, you guys don't know about each other's histories. Communication can be really important because you don't know what's going on in the other person's mind. You don't know how they react to certain situations. And they may have an idea of what you want, but it might not be what you want. So just being really clear with, what you want in terms of when you are having sex, obviously, be vocal in more ways than one. But also just being really clear about your intentions. Are you looking for someone to hook up with for now? Is this just a tonight thing? Is this, I felt a real connection. I want to see where this goes. There are a lot of different scenarios that can transpire in terms of one night stands, and being really clear about your intentions in the beginning can either, save whatever this relationship could become. Being clear about your intentions before things get hot and heavy can save a lot of pain and a lot of heartache. In terms that if you say to your potential partner in the beginning, I just got out of something hard, or I'm just looking to have some fun for the night, it may not be what that person wants to hear, but at least they're being honest. And then you can have a conversation of, oh, well, that's not what I'm looking for tonight, or that's exactly what I'm looking for tonight. So it helps clarify where you guys are in the beginning of whatever you guys decide to do that night. And honestly, when you really think about it, if you are having, if you go into a one night stand or a hookup with someone and at the end of it, they're like, okay, great, I had fun, but you were expecting this to be more than just fun for the night, that causes more pain than was needed, basically. Or vice versa, maybe you're the one who was like, oh, well, this was just something that I thought we both just wanted to have fun. But now this has become more complicated because we didn't have that conversation prior to the fact. And I think that this can be a little tricky in that you want to be spontaneous and passionate, and there is something very alluring about the idea of being with someone, being with a stranger, even to the point of, I don't even know your name. Like, there can be something very alluring about that. But I would recommend and challenge people who maybe have encountered this in the past to just be honest in the first place. If you're getting into a Lyft or an Uber or a cab with this person and it's getting intense and you think to yourself, we're going back to my place, I think that's probably the moment when you say, by the way, what are you looking for out of this? And it doesn't have to be a heavy question. It just has to be, are you looking for fun tonight? Or are we getting breakfast tomorrow and maybe having lunch and maybe having dinner? Because even if neither of you are looking for a relationship, you can also, become a casual, continuous hookup with one another. In that you enter into a kind of pseudo relationship or a friends with benefits relationship. On that note, I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we're going to be continuing our discussion on one-night stands. Stay tuned.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sex Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am, of course, your host, Becky, back again, and we are talking about one-night stands today. One of the interesting questions that I had asked with my friends in doing research was, why do we have one-night stands? And I think the simple reason is that most people want to have sex or are interested in having sex, but maybe aren't interested in a relationship. But I think the other aspect is, people who aren't in a relationship anymore and maybe their relationship was intense or, very committed. And one of the things that a friend of mine had said was that, they had encountered several partners who were just kind of longing for that connection with someone. They were missing the feeling of connecting to a partner in the most intimate way. And in my mind, I think it's an interesting concept of what kind of connection each of us are looking for. I know for me, I look for emotional connection before I look for sexual connection. But I also know that other people are more interested in a sexual connection versus an emotional one. So it's an interesting question of, what is it that we are looking for as humans that fills that desire in you? And when we are leaving a relationship, is it that we miss the feeling of familiarity with someone? Is it that we miss the feeling of intimacy with someone, being vulnerable? Is it that we want certain pleasures that we can't achieve on our own? It's just an interesting concept to me, and it makes me wonder, is this a healthy way of coping? Because on one hand, it is physically allowing you to move on from a previous partner. And on the other hand, it may be kind of confusing in that you are looking for some kind of connection or vulnerability with someone, but that might not be the understanding of your partner who you're having a one-night stand or a hookup with. Which again goes back to our first topic of conversation, which is, have that conversation. And that way you both understand what's happening. And again is another reason why you should communicate with each other about what you're looking for in this moment. Because if you're looking for someone to connect with in a certain way, and you think, well, I can just grab someone that I find attractive and that will be enough, it could or it couldn't. And it could be that at the end of the night or the morning or whatever, you end up feeling a little emptier, or you feel unsatisfied emotionally, even though you are satisfied physically. So having that conversation with a potential partner may help you clear up the distinctions and the blurs between those lines. Another thing that I had found interesting in terms of talking with some friends was I had another friend who had said that there's almost like a don't ask, don't tell notion when it comes to hookups and one night stands. And personally, this makes me very sad in that it was almost as if they were saying, you know, I don't need to know about you. You don't need to know about me. We're just going to do this and then we're going to move on with our lives, which in one sense is fine. But also going back to my podcast on safe sex, it's important to protect yourself and protect your body. So it makes me sad that, you know, in today's hookup culture, there's this feeling of, I don't need to know anything about you. We're just going to have sex and move on. Which, of course, if you both are consenting adults, is fine. But again, not protecting, you know, yourself or your body leaves you vulnerable to more than just heartbreak. It can leave you vulnerable to STDs or venereal diseases. So why not try to communicate with this person? You know, why is it that we need all mystery or no mystery at all? Why can't there be some kind of balance between the two? And on that note, I'm going to take another quick break. And when I come back, we're going to be continuing our discussion on one night stands and maybe how to get out of a bad one night stand. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sex Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am, again, of course, your host, Becky, and we've been talking a lot about one-night stands. What are the connotations of one-night stands? What do we know about one-night stands? And beyond. And in this segment, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to get out of a one-night stand. Because from what I hear, it can be a little messy. And in the sense that maybe you're with a partner, maybe things are starting off good, and then it takes a turn for the worse. And not in anything that's, you know, threatening or anything, but maybe you're just not feeling it. Or maybe even, you know, in the beginning, maybe you start kissing them and you're just not feeling a spark or a connection or an electricity between you two, and you think, well, I don't know if this is going to work for me. Well, first of all, it's totally fine to feel those things. And as I've said on here before, you can always stop in the middle of sex if you don't want to do it anymore. And being with partners who respect that is super important. So this hookup isn't going your way. And you're thinking, I got to get out of here. How do you do that? I mean, how do you say to someone, this isn't working for me, and I think I'm just going to go home? Like, we gave it our best college try, but it's just not working. That can be kind of harsh to tell somebody. And especially if, you know, that person is in a fragile moment in their lives. One, you may not know about it. You never know what's going on with someone, especially people that you don't know. And two, it can kind of come off a little rude, you know, about how they express their sexual appetite. And, I think some people just don't quite mesh that in that way, and that's okay too. And realizing it sooner rather than later can help you guys move forward in whatever relationship that you're going to have. So I don't have a lot of experience in this area, which I will be open and honest about. But in my mind, I would assume a good place to start would be checking in with this partner, and maybe even checking in the sense of like, do you like that? Does this feel good to you? This, that, and the other. And if they're still saying yes, 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 there's really no other way to say that you aren't into it other than saying, this isn't working for me. Like, I'm not really into this. But it doesn't necessarily have to be rude. I mean, people are going to interpret whatever you say in however they're going to interpret it. You can't control that. But you can also, start by checking in. And if it's still not working for you, if you're still communicating with each other, but something isn't quite working for you, you can say, I'm sorry, like, this isn't working for me. I think you're great, but I'm just not feeling a connection here. I'm not feeling, that sexual desire that I felt when we were, back at the club or back at the restaurant. And I would think that more than likely they're going to feel that too, because if you're not comfortable in this most kind of vulnerable element, I think it's a little more obvious to tell with your other partner. And they're going to sense that too. So if you're already feeling uncomfortable, they're probably feeling uncomfortable too, because they don't know what's making you feel uncomfortable. And it's probably easier just to say it rather than just convey it with body language. Because at least your words won't necessarily be interpreted differently. But body language can come off with many different interpretations, right? There are, I would say, very seldom body language functions that are clear and definitive. So I think that if you are with someone, if you're with someone who is overly offended or, gets kind of really mad at you, one, I would say that you dodged a bullet, because if they want you to continue, even though you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling it, then that's someone that you don't want to be with. You don't want to be with someone who's going to force you into anything that you don't want to do. I think at the end of the day, people don't want to hurt each other's feelings. And if you're with a partner who is okay with hurting your feelings, it's not okay. So in terms of one night stands, I would say from an outsider perspective, it seems kind of like a tricky world. And again, I would just recommend having clear communication between whoever you're with, because it's going to make all the difference in, one, your relationships, but also in your brief encounters. Because you're both going in on the same page, and you're both going in with an understanding that this may lead to something, this may not lead to something. I'm not looking for it to lead somewhere. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to hurt each other, and we all want to have a good time. And in these instances, there's a connotation that one night stands or hookups are dirty or are not substantial. And I think it's just part of being human. I think there is an element of finding someone who you connect with in a certain way. And sometimes that connection can come from, a stranger, or it can come from a friend, or it can come from a lover. It can come from an ex. I mean, there are so many different ways of going about it. And one-night stands, I think, are just a part of that. So that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a little out of my comfort zone, to be honest. But it was an interesting conversation that I got to have with close friends of mine. And so I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'd love to know your thoughts. And I'd love to start a conversation because, like I said, this is something that I'm not really familiar with. So look us up on social media. We are on Facebook and Twitter. Our Facebook is Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. And our Twitter is GSMC_sex. And as always, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe our podcast. I'm having a lot of fun doing it, but I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say. And leaving a nice review really helps us. So please leave a review. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know how we're doing. And I will see you all again next time. Bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.